Hello, welcome to EVN Report. My name is Maria Titizian. On November 10, the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia signed an agreement to end military operations following 6 weeks of brutal fighting that has taken the lives of thousands of soldiers and dozens of civilians. During the hostilities and even now, after the fighting has stopped, there is mounting evidence of war crimes that have been and continue to be committed by Azerbaijani forces. To talk about the nature of these crimes and what steps are being taken, today in the studio, my guest is Ara Ghazaryan. He's an international human rights lawyer and a litigator. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting.
Ara, we saw war crimes being committed back in 2016 during the 4-day war. And this time, during the hostilities, we saw a number of crimes taking place, from targeting civilian settlements to using that you will tell me about, incendiary weapons like white phosphorus.
Yes.
We have seen mutilation of bodies, beheadings, a lot of gruesome things that took place. But even war has rules.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Of course, yeah.
Before we go back in time, let's talk about what's taking place right now. And the fact that we have, and the numbers aren't clear, prisoners of war today in Azerbaijani captivity. What can you tell us about the situation right now?
Well, the general situation is, this time is different from 2016. War crimes occurred also in 2016, but the scales were different. And the types were different. And also the legal remedies now are different. In 2016, mostly individual and only individual applications were brought to the closest court, which is the European Court of Human Rights, by individual groups like people like me and the group that we're working with. But this time the state took over, and the state very successfully brought interstate application to European Court of Human Rights. It's a different kind of litigation. It's a broader litigation. It's not that much detailed than if you bring individual application, meaning the individual facts of the case. But the impact, of course, is huge. And Armenia was successful. In the first week of October, first interim measure application was brought against Azerbaijan, which was granted. It was a success because I have been taking Rule 39 applications, individual applications, many times to the European Court, and the standard of proof is very, very high. You need to have very decisive, concrete evidence and some kind of abundance of evidence in order to overcome this standard of proof. Armenia did it. It was successful. And then second application again for interim measure against Turkey, it was also granted. We don't know what kind of evidence Armenian authorities brought. Judging from what the newspapers are telling us, evidence must have been higher than according to the media. Because again, with evidence like we hear from media, European Court would not grant this application. So it was a success. 2 interim measure applications were granted. And then final application has to follow that. We don't know whether Armenia has filed, most possibly has not yet filed, but whether Armenia is going to file a final application against Azerbaijan, we don't know. It may even not. Because about 10 days ago, I saw a statement from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which gives me a basis to believe that statement was against Azerbaijan, calling on the state of Azerbaijan to respect its policy of non-discrimination and non-racism against Armenia. I judge from that statement that Armenia is going to bring a new case to ICJ this time, International Court of Justice, on the basis of racism. And that statement was one of the measures of such a so-called exhaustion of remedies before taking this case. So this time Armenia is more successful in taking over these legal remedies against Azerbaijan. But as far as it concerns human rights issues, but because you asked about war crimes, these two premises, they overlap, the humanitarian law and human rights law. And there's a strong case law about this. So if Armenia brought cases to the European Court of Human Rights and it's going to bring case to ICJ, of course, all these violations will be and are in these applications. And there are many violations that we can speak about these days and days. So just to summarize, to answer your question, all these war crimes, they are registered, they are fixed as evidence, and we are looking for avenues to bring them before the international community and before the international tribunals. We already opened one door to European Court of Human Rights. We may open the second door to ICJ. And our diplomats have brought this and they continue bringing this to other platforms. They are human rights platforms, political platforms, in order to present it in a more clear form that Azerbaijan violated the rules of war and committed war crimes. And Azerbaijan usually is trying to create a mirror effect. This time, whether they can be successful or not, they have to make up stories. But it's clear that they do not have a parity. Even in the European Court, they could not create a parity because they do not have a single case, for example, of decapitation, a single case of humiliation of prisoner of war and posting the video on the internet. They do not have such case because Armenians do not do that. If they had it, definitely they would put it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something just as a regular person. If in 2016 the Armenian government had applied to the ECHR or other platforms or tribunals, is there a way to prevent this? That's my question. Because, in 2016, I remember when we had, if I'm not mistaken, 3 cases of beheadings, right?
Yes, right.
There were mutilation of a number of corpses.
17
that were transferred through the assistance of the International Committee for the Red Cross. And whatever steps were taken to highlight these issues, to take them to the ECHR on an individual case basis. Is there any way to prevent this from happening? Or are we just fooling ourselves?
No. They actually prevent, but we do not see it. We see, let's say, if those cases were not brought, we could have more cases and even harsher cases. If you compare the scale of this war with, for example, the Balkan War, there's no comparison. In Balkan War, for example, only in the Bosnian War, 30,000 soldiers died and 30,000 civilians died. A genocide occurred, like 8,000 males killed from one city, Srebrenica case. So the scales are different. The war is a war. It's a tragic event. But the scales are different, and international law, international human rights law, prevents, but not totally. It cannot prevent totally. I've been taking cases to European Court in the last 10 years. Every time when I take a case with a specific scenario, then the state of Azerbaijan does not repeat the same scenario. They do it differently. For example, kidnapping of Armenian citizens or ethnic Armenians from the border and posing them as terrorists and etc. And so they never repeat because they know that if the case is taken to European Court of Human Rights or other international tribunal, it's some kind of a resisting mechanism. Even when they're bombing the cities and villages, and they're doing it regularly, but they're changing their tactics all the time in order to present it as a deviation from the target. International law permits a deviation from the target if there is a legitimate target. For example, bombing of Stepanakert. Of course, they're going to say that they bombed the regiment, military regiment. But what about the church of Shushi? They did it twice and they never did it because the harm from that was bigger than the military effect. Bombing a church, you cannot gain a military
advantage.
Advantage. But the noise, international reaction was harsher, was stronger. That's why they stopped. But anyway, the church was bombed. So we do not see the real. For example, they never bombed the mines like Drambon. They didn't bomb it. They didn't bomb the very center of Stepanakert.
Right, the parliament building.
Yes, and it was done on purpose. Because if they did it,
they knew.
The resistance, the harm, every time when they do wrongdoing, they have to invest some political resources, media resources, in order to resist the international reaction. And these resources are limited, so they calculated everything. So that's why, from the one hand, we're thinking why these crimes occur, but we never see what would be the real effect if international mechanisms were not in place. For example, if this interstate application was not in place, the scales could have been different. So international law is not perfect. There are many gaps in that because it's based on the consent of the state.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
and when the states are coming into agreement, they do not base it on the base of human rights. They are grounding it on the base of, how to say that, political compromise, let's put it in this way, which is far away from the basic human rights issues. Sometimes they overlap, but mostly they do not. That's why we have such an imperfect framework of international law.
The human rights defenders of Armenia and Artsakh were very, very vocal and very proactive during the course of the hostilities. We would see them oftentimes not only posting about the war crimes that were taking place, but they've also issued a number of reports, interim reports,
Yes.
and they continue to work in that regard. This obviously is a positive step forward from what I remember in the past. I have a question about the prisoners of war. Again, we don't have clear numbers. There have been reports in the media, and unfortunately, I know it's a cliche, but in the fog of war, the information that reaches the population can hardly be trusted these days. In Armenia particularly, there's been extreme polarization in the media. Do we know right now how many prisoners of war there are in Azerbaijani captivity, both combatants and non-combatants?
We can only guess, and these are non-state bodies. The state did very bad, and the state is still doing very bad in imparting information to citizens about not only about the real figures, but what's being actually done. So because there is no official number, private groups, lawyers, they think that there are around 100 to 150 prisoners of war. And judging from those Azerbaijani sources, not judging from the Armenian sources, again, this organizational matter, how the state is imparting information to its own citizens about the state of the war, even during the war, and during the war it's quite a different story. After the war, why these people, the parents, are gathering up before the government, it's because of the lack of information. That's the number one reason. So we do not know the real figure, but it's according to media, it's from 100 to 150. Around 50 cases have been submitted by the government to the European Court of Human Rights. And these individual cases have come under protection of European Court of Human Rights because when the case is communicated, the respondent state, Azerbaijan, already has obligation to provide the true information. They usually provide information, but not much, not detailed. And these videos that we see, they are coming from private sources. They're not from
Obviously,
state sources.
the state isn't releasing
State is
them.
behind, of course. It's private.
Yeah, but just so our listeners know, there have been, especially on Telegram channels, on Twitter,
Yes.
there have been a number of videos that have been posted, again, by people we don't know, by individuals, of how they are humiliating Armenian soldiers.
The whole range of...
cutting off ears and fingers.
Yeah,
and
the whole
posting
range
them.
of mostly humiliation, even when they force the prisoners to repeat Karabakh is Azerbaijan. Yeah, in Azerbaijan. Like, this is violation. Even under humanitarian law, under Geneva Conventions, even spreading their photos in humiliating positions is a violation. And there are now rumors that they want to do military parade, and
I know,
but I don't think it will happen.
Yeah, again,
Not a military
military
parade, but
showcasing the prisoners of war.
yeah, it happened
publicly.
I think they will not do it because it's
Because it's unfathomable. But again, the images, and unfortunately, some of the videos, I try not to watch them because it's just, it's inhumane and it's disturbing. But when you're cutting off an ear of a soldier who's alive or trying to behead someone who's still alive, I mean, sometimes we think.
Besides, legally, when a soldier does a crime, then they may still bring a case against the soldier, and in this way to show that they are fulfilling their international obligation. But if they do this parade, it's directly attributable to the entire state.
Right.
And
So
like
it's
in Ramil
state-sponsored.
Safarov case, yes, they will have no excuse. It happened in Donbass, in Ukraine. And I even have a photo, and I use it in my training with journalists about what cannot be done, what cannot be reported, or how it cannot be reported, these war crimes. Yeah. It happened once in Donbass, and then in 1944, the very famous parade in Moscow of Nazi thousands of walking, and then in the end coming these water shower cars which cleaned the streets. This famous video. We are in a different world now. We are in a treaty-based war. We are in a world, and it's a rule-based world. It's absolutely prohibited. This parade under humanitarian law is an international crime. I don't think that they will do it. But what's been done so far, that's already a gross human rights and international crimes. And Armenian authorities, they have opened criminal cases. And I think in the future, we will have individual criminal cases against individuals of Azerbaijani nationals, charges based on committal of international war crimes, and even prosecuting them and even chasing them in different countries. I think this will come in the future. This is for the future. At this point, what they do, including the ombudsman, both ombudsmen, who did very nice job, even better than the state bodies with their huge resources, they fixed evidence, a lot of evidence. And when someone is arguing something before the court, if they present something fixed by ombudsman, it's accepted as a totally truth. So that's the value of the reports by both ombudsman. It's a truth. It's non-negotiable. Especially our ombudsman. You know that our ombudsman is included among they put it in this way, among the 15 wise people in Europe. You know that?
Is that right?
Yeah. Formally. Yeah. His name is among these 15 wise people of Europe. So if something happens in Europe and they want to seek advice from a smart official or well-known, our ombudsman is one of them. We should know that, but see, we don't know it because he's been criticized a lot, unfairly.
I think, first of all, just to sort of divert a little bit from the conversation we're having, every country has suffered some form of defeat in its history. This defeat, I think, has brought out a lot of emotions in the country. There's a lot of noise in the country. There's a lot of accusations and finger pointing and calling each other traitors and all of that. And that's sort of diluting the work that needs to be done today.
Yes.
From a legal perspective, and the work that you and people like you in Armenia are doing, from what the government needs to do. So these are things that we need to talk about and not be fearful of talking about, obviously. But coming back, I do want to talk about the civilians that we know that were also captured after the signing of the November 10 agreement. There was a case of 10 or 11 people, and then a case of a Lebanese-Armenian couple who, after the agreement, wanted to go back and get some of their belongings. Does the law look at these combatants and non-combatants in the same light?
If it's about human rights standards, then there should be no difference. If we're talking about humanitarian law, of course, they make a difference. But even during the war and during the active phase of military war, the human rights exist. Like I have a case before the European Court when our 3 soldiers were killed in the military position, but at the moment when they did not have arm and were not on active duty, but they off the duty in order to prepare food. Under humanitarian law, things must be judged situational. At this very situation, they were combatants, but they were not in active duty. So it counts from the standard, from the point of view of the standard of proportionality of use of force. In this context, when civilians are arrested, they're not combatants, they're not prisoners of war. They cannot be put under arrest or detention. They should be repatriated immediately, and information should be given to Armenian side immediately.
Has that information been given? Do we know that?
No. But European Court decided recently in the Sarıbekyan case, which I brought to European Court, it decided that just because there are no diplomatic relations between two states, that does not mean that Azerbaijan is not bound of non-cooperating with Armenian government about the citizens who cross the border. It was said about Sarıbekyan, it was said also about Ara Ghazaryan case. So under Council of Europe principles, under European Court of Human Rights standards, Azerbaijan has to cooperate with Armenia when our civilians appeared in their region. And they do not, because they just ignore international human rights law. But they are saying something different before the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, before the European Court of Human Rights, during the litigation, they tell different story. For example, with the case of Nakhichevan, they said that Mr. Sardaryan crossed the border willfully and claimed asylum. At least it was good that he was not turned into a terrorist, but this time the authorities openly said that he asked for asylum. If that was the case, then they should have ensured a whole lot of remedies because he's asylum seekers, and they did not.
Which they did not.
So this, I think the same scenario may be worked out with respect to these citizens. They may either say that they claim asylum, or, well, they cannot make up anything different because they're not soldiers. They, I think, through Lebanese, for example, they're getting back to Shushi or to Stepanakert for their belongings. So the fact that so far there's been no information conveyed to Armenian authorities, it's already a violation.
And the ICRC obviously is aware of this and is involved, but
they're not cooperating with public. They're not imparting information to public. They're not getting involved in legal processes, only in family relationship, like being proxy in order to convey information. But again, that's the only hope. People, when they identify a video, they rush to Red Cross instead of going to Armenian authorities. It's also ironic. It's because Armenian authorities, they're not active in dealing with their own citizens. That's why people are going to the Red Cross.
About 10 days ago or a week ago, I've lost track of time these days. I was in, after the signing of the agreement, I was in Karabakh, went to Stepanakert and saw about 150 people standing in front of the president's office. And there were other journalists, and I was going to see what was going on. And when the journalist said, don't go, and I said, who are these people? He said, these are citizens of Armenia, fathers, who have come to Artsakh, to Stepanakert, looking for their sons.
Yeah, it's because of lack of information.
That's right. Yeah. And that's continuing now here in Yerevan, and people need...
It's not well organized,
Yeah.
It's not well organized. I mean, these people should be treated well, first of all. They cannot be forced to wait outside of the building. Let's start from these minor details in the cold. They have to be invited in, taken care, and explained by lawyers, psychologists, social psychologists, military specialists. They have to be, if they are treated well, they will not go before the government and wait for hours and hours and protest against the government. It's because of the lack of information. They understand it's a war. I haven't seen any single parent who complained why my son was taken to war. But they are complaining why there is no information about time frame, about witnesses, so that they can go and question or ask them, and about perspectives, etc. Or just the treatment, human treatment. It's very simple. Even the police says, wait outside. It's cold, and for hours these women are waiting out. These minor things, they count,
Of course.
because they are in a stress.
Naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awful
tragic.
because they don't know whether their sons have been killed, whether they're in captivity.
And like people individually, I've been approached by so many people asking me and my lawyer friends to give them address of Azerbaijani web pages where they post videos.
Wow.
The state should have taken about that. The state should have identified these videos and found the parents and informed them. but they do it individually, and Azeris provoke. They post these videos and they remove. They post again and they remove it back, so that it would not be attributable to the state, because if the video stays too long, then the state has some kind of liability for not removing it or for not bringing a case against individual. So Azeris do it tactically.
Causing deeper psychological distress.
Yeah. And when there's inaction on behalf of the state, people protest.
Right, obviously. One question, I'm not sure that, does cultural appropriation, for example, right now, the narrative that's being built by the Azerbaijani government is that the ancient Armenian churches were in fact Albanian, Caucasian Albanian churches from which they have derived, and the Armenians are now even had set up shops with the cross stones and we're just creating them now. Talk to me about the desecration of churches, of graveyards, of cemeteries. Does this fall within international human rights law?
If there are sufficient evidence to prove that there is a link between these actions of individuals and the state policy of racism, then of course it's coming under that wide context. That's what we've been doing it before international court when arguing under Article 14, like discrimination of racism. We brought the arguments widely. We started from President Aliyev about his statements on the different occasions of racist policies, other public officers, what are kids being taught in the schools, and actions of individuals. So it's a very wide context of the state policy of racism in order to intimidate ethnic Armenians and Armenian nationals worldwide. This has been my argument in the last 10 years before the European Court, and it worked. Finally worked in the last two cases, when the European Court decided that indeed there is this state official policy in Azerbaijan of racism. And that's why Armenia is preparing another claim to ICJ this time, interstate application. So these minor things, that we see on the video, and the methods of war that they chose, especially the methods of war, they're coming under this general policy of racism. In Bosnia, for example, rape was a method of war. There are even factories of rape, that's how they call it. It was not only for torturing citizens, but using this rape as a torture, as a method of war for intimidating ethnic Bosniaks and Muslims. So if we draw a comparison, what methods of war they choose, this treatment of prisoners, posting them on the video and removing and reposting again, targeting civilian population systematically but carefully so that some legitimate targets would be hit, but also the collateral damage, but wider, much wider, not the specter that is allowed under international human rights. And carefully, measuring the reaction of international community and coordinating the war efforts with the reaction of international community. This was all calculated. And the racism is underlying principle of the war. Even the preparation of the war, preparing their nation to the war in the last 25 years by racism. So they're targeting Armenian communities not only for having a military gain, but because they're Armenians and they think Armenians. That's the situation, and I don't know how Let me bring you one example. Recently, I was having a webinar. I finished a training on disability and non-discrimination with 6 country representatives. Among them were Azerbaijanis too. The last session coincided with the start of the war. It was not the last session. It was the official closure of the program. And I was a tutor. I was one of the main persons in this project. I couldn't participate. My colleagues participated. And then they're surprised. They said that people from Azerbaijan, in the beginning, they said that they want to make official statement. I said, okay, do your statement. And they said, we are discriminated by Armenians in this is during the war, when their troops are attacking our citizens and towns, but they think that they are discriminating by this program because there are Armenians who participate in this program. And they call it indirect discrimination. I'm not giving you much details so that organizers would not be in a awkward situation. And I believe that they really trusted what they're saying.
They believe what they're saying.
Yeah, they're under agitation. It's a state agitation that Armenians are bad. They are bad because they occupied our territories. They are separatists. They are newcomers. They are newcomers. They came to this territory in the beginning of the 19th century, 1828. And they are not Christians, they are Albanians, even the Ganjasar is Albania. This is the narrative, like it's true, it's narrative. Now it works. In the beginning, like until the mid-90s, there was nothing like that. Until the end of 90s, there was nothing like that. It's a state policy, but the generation now changes. And now this new generation, they believe it because they lived for 25 years with that. And only people of my age still remember that there's other narrative too.
That's right.
Yeah. So getting back to the previous life would be very hard. Like my last training with journalists in Bosnia was about glorification of war criminals. 25 years has passed since the decisions of international tribunals on the war in Bosnia. And many people have been tried by international tribunals for genocide, for war crimes. And they resolved a lot of issues. They are cooperating. There are no borders. They're traveling. I traveled a lot in these countries. They've overcome a lot of problems. But after 25 years with change of generation, still there are a lot of publications by which they want to glorify the war criminals as being true patriots. So these things, what I'm trying to say, these things, they pass away with a lot of efforts, and they may not even. We are now in a situation like Kosovo, people of Kosovo in the end of 90s, when it was under NATO, because NATO then conveyed the mandate to UN. But we are I'm feeling like we are in the end of 90s in Bosnia, in Kosovo, post-war depression. Especially I was having a lot of common projects, and the Serbs were there, and their feelings, kind of they lost the entire country, empire, But now they're moving through towards the Europe. And my impression now when I'm going, of course, still problems are there, especially with these publications of glorification of war crimes. But I think with these problems, they overcome a lot of psychological, economic, social, legal issues, and they're moving forward. Whether we can have a success with that, it's a big question.
I think right now it's very early to tell. I think there's a long, hard, torturous road ahead for us. But what are the steps forward? Let's try and summarize what we talked about. What are the steps that need to be taken?
I think there are more perspectives now. Ironically, it may sound, but there are more perspectives now from the legal point of view than before.
How
we
so?
no longer have status quo.
Right.
Status quo, what is status quo? It's a gray area. It's a vacuum in international law. And if you prefer to live in a vacuum, no one will help you. That's why international community never supported Armenia.
Which
with
now
our
in
independence
hindsight,
claim.
we understand better, right? Right now.
We should understand it better. But now, again, we are, instead of looking for systemic problems, we are looking for personal problems. We put all the blames on Nikol Pashinyan, and we call him traitor. And we are not willing to speak about our own mistakes of our society. This returning of occupied territories, it was a closed item. It was a closed topic. Even Serge Sarkisian made one comment in 2011, and he was labeled as a traitor. And it costed him almost a power. Otherwise, if someone wanted to gain a power, he would be a patriot reaching up to Baku. So we need to rethink what we've done wrong. But continuing the topic you raised, we are now in a situation where now Azerbaijan will try to keep the status quo. And we must demand to be in line with rule of law. Rule of law this time is the international treaty law. This agreement, which was a ceasefire agreement, is not a treaty, because treaty should be very detailed, like Kosovo Treaty, Rambouillet Treaty, 86 pages. Should be very detailed and should cover human rights issues, refugees, mechanism, deoccupation of entire Armenia from the Azerbaijani side, maybe also including the Turkish side. We need to negotiate and negotiate on the basis of the rule of law, international law. And now we need to understand that we are in a better situation in a sense that we will now gain a support from international community, including the independence claim of Karabakh, of Artsakh. Because Azeris will no longer have a legal point. Before, they could have said that our territories are occupied. Now they got even more.
Part of NKAO proper,
and they cannot put it on the same level,
Right.
the deoccupation of their territories with the status of Karabakh. This is not the same level, because the status of Karabakh is a human rights. Even ICC under ICCPR and Human Rights Charter, claiming of independence, it's human rights. It means human rights is above everything. It's an idea on the basis of which this entire world order was created, the UN Charter. And the international community understands that. And there are mechanisms to reach that. So we need to negotiate. And again, we need to realize what mistakes we've done. We need to realize finally what the former president, Petrosyan, said in the end of the 90s, that you will not enjoy a support from international community as long as you keep the status quo. Because status quo is not a rule of law. It's, again, gray area. It's a mistake. It's a provisional measure, and you cannot rely on any support from any state. They will support you as long as human rights issues will come up or independence issues, but they are interrelated. So now we have a claim, and now we may enjoy a support from international community. We just need to overcome this post-war depression and to concentrate on the future. And if we want to look behind only in order to construct our future.
Right.
That's what I can say now.
And I think on that note, and that's a lesson that we all should take from this, and understanding the mistakes that were made, understanding that this war was unwinnable for the Armenian side.
Because Turkey joined.
Because of Turkey's direct involvement militarily, politically, strategically, with the employment of mercenaries and the technical, the drone. It was a drone war, basically.
Fifth generation war. We're not ready for that.
And you're right. It's about now moving forward, and whoever is accountable will be held accountable, and whoever needs to pay for it will pay for it. But now, as a society, as a country, we need to figure out how to move forward, how to be smart about it, intelligent about it, strategic about it.
Yeah, and we do not have to personalize. Our society likes to personalize the problems, but we need to look for systemic problems.
It was if you ask me, Ara, I mean, I'm just a journalist, but I think it was a systemic collapse in the sense that diplomatically, militarily, and as a citizen of Armenia, as a journalist, I have a lot of questions. And these are questions that we need to be asking and be tough about it, because we have to face what happened in order to move forward.
Yeah. Like all other nations who lost the war, including Germans, they overcome this syndrome of post-war depression. But they overcome because they accepted the wrongdoings that their men did, their people did. This very famous photo of military parade of Nazis, a huge amount of people in 1938. Where are these people? Of course, they're still there. So they need to reevaluate the values that they took at one time as a dogma, as a dogmatic indoctrination. When you indoctrinate something by saying that this is the only truth, then you starting having problems. So you need to also think about the values, our values.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting, and thank you for this interesting conversation.